Thank you so much. Thanks for starting the recording. That's terrific. Welcome, everyone. We're always so happy and amazed that people take time out of their busy lives to join us, and we hope to make this hour that you spend with us worthwhile. I'll say a note about housekeeping and then go into land acknowledgement. Tina might have already covered this, but because it's a big group, we'll keep everyone muted. Please do use the chat function to communicate, and be sure to enter your email address if you'd like to be on the mailing list. You will have a chance to speak when we get to the Q&A, and that's the most relaxed, intimate part of the evening. I am Susan Scott, your host and moderator, and I always begin my sessions with a land acknowledgement, which is part of the work, the truth and reconciliation work that we are learning to do, those of us who are in Canada. I'm speaking to you from the Great Lakes Basin, and this is the site of the Haldimand Tract. The land that I'm on was promised to Six Nations. It's the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. And if you know the names of the Earth Keepers in the part of the country or the part of the planet that you're from, we'll welcome you to enter that into the chat stream. And that gives us all kind of collective moment to acknowledge the land and that we are sustained by the land, and our deep gratitude for the land and those who've kept it healthy and create a creative space for generation after generation after generation. So let me outline the hour. We basically, I have a special guest who I'll introduce in a moment. She and I will converse for a little bit, and then she will lead us through a writing exercise. All of that will then be recorded, and you'll find that after the webinar in a few days' time, posted on the Awakening Spirituality website and on our YouTube channel. So you have that as a little capsule resource that you can go back to anytime if you want to do the writing exercise again, or if you want to think about the topic that came up tonight and revisit that. All of that then will be recorded. And when we stop the recording, then we'll go into Q&A, and that'll give us a chance to get to know one another, and that'll be a more informal part. The focus of these sessions is spiritual life story writing. That is my passion. I'm determined to have a world domination spiritual life writing. Life writing, as you probably know, it's a genre that unites memory and experience. So think of spiritual life writing as inviting the whole self in: memory, experience, fact, feeling, imagination, the profane, and the sacred. So we offer these sessions to help you find your voice and to shed whatever fears make you hold your tongue. And tonight is a very special segment. This is our 24th webinar. We began these in the fall of 2020 with no idea whether anyone would find us or care. And it really is thanks to the attentiveness of people such as yourself that we've been able to carry on for 2 full years, bringing you kind of a deep dive into this undersung genre. In 2023, we will switch to a quarterly format and offer masterclasses that invite special guests to come in. We'll still have writing exercises and resources and things that help you take a deep dive and come up writing. So tonight we'll explore the role of memory and questions of erasure and belonging. You will need some writing supplies. If you have a pen, a pencil and scrap paper or notebook ready, that would be ideal, as well as your favorite free writing medium. That might also be pen and paper or laptop, but keep those ready so you'll have them when we go into the writing exercise portion. And there is a sensitivity warning. I want you to be aware that we will be touching on the subject of suicide and how that can impact family life. So fair warning, if that comes up, just be attentive to whatever self-care you need around that topic. So my special guest is Kirsten Fogg. Kirsten, I'm so happy that you're with us. I'm going to read your beautiful bio just as is so people can meet you and know a little bit about you. Kirsten left Canada in 1989 with an almost empty bank account, 2 suitcases, and a one-way ticket to Paris. She returned almost 30 years later as a bilingual Australian-Canadian journalist and award-winning essayist. After starting out as an au pair in France, Kirsten lived in England and Australia, where she wrote for the Chicago Tribune, the Globe and Mail, and other newspapers. The literary essays appear in Creative Nonfiction, the Malahat Review, Brevity's nonfiction blog, and have been adapted by ABC Radio National. With an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from the University of King's College, Halifax, Kirsten is working on her first book. You can visit her website, writeroutofresidence.com, and you will see that link to her website on the slides when we get to that portion of the evening. So, Kirsten, so happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you everyone for taking the time out of your evening or morning or afternoon to be here. First, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the land on which I live, write, and dream. It's the traditional land of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat people. It's home to many Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. As an immigrant and as an Australian, I'd like to acknowledge my other homeland, Meanjin, now known as Brisbane. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land, the Turrbal and Yagara people, to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to thank you, Susan, and Spiritual Awakening for allowing us and helping us gather here today.
Well, this is a treat. This is a big treat for us. So I think you and I met, we never met in person. We've only met online. And I'm pretty sure we met because of some random, spiritual life writing webinar that I was giving somewhere a couple of years ago. And you made some really interesting comments and just a couple of comments. And I thought, oh, how interesting. Who is that person? And that sort of became the beginning of conversations. And we've had a conversation back and forth several times about, if you were to come on this webinar, what would you be passionate about? What would you want to talk about? Because you spent this last couple of years doing your MFA, you've got the skeleton of your book ready to explore, ready to go. But it's taken time really to think about what would you want to talk about here tonight? Because we always talk about things that are incredibly intimate and universal, right? We sort of try to do the both and. And I was fascinated by your choosing the subject of erasure and belonging. So do you want to just tell us the story about why that surfaced for you? It's a fascinating story. So just take your time.
So it's something that I've been thinking about for decades. And I'd like to share the story with you. And I'd particularly like to share what happened in the past year and what I realized. And most of this I haven't actually told anyone else. And I feel this is a safe place and the right place to do this. So I want to go back to around 2012 when I was having a crisis. I was no longer a freelance foreign correspondent, making my own money, traveling and being independent. We'd moved to Brisbane from Sydney. I'd become a mother. My husband traveled internationally for work for extensive periods of time, and I didn't know who I was anymore. I was the primary caregiver. My worldview had suddenly shifted closer to the ground, really close to the ground. I felt like I was going to spend the rest of my life stuck to the floor, wiping up caca. Once I dug my way out from underneath the pile of dirty nappies, I set to rebuild a writing career. The problem was no one seemed interested. I was a published essayist and journalist. I'd lived and worked in France and England, and I got rejection after rejection after rejection. On top of that, I couldn't seem to make any contacts or any new ones. Everyone seemed to have all of the relationships they needed. They all seemed to know each other. And then I applied for something else, this time a residency. and it was rejected. I'm sure most people here know a little bit about rejection. But this was the rejection that changed me. I was tired of battling and tired of trying to fit in. As an immigrant, I'm the one who is expected to change, to adapt, and I've been doing it for years. I was doing it when I started out as an au pair in Paris, and then when I got my first real job, and when I married a Frenchman, and then when I divorced him, and I moved to Canada briefly, then to England. So that residency rejection, for some reason, just made me feel erased. What I didn't understand was that I played a part in it. But we'll come back to that. It was that rejection that got me angry, and anger can be a very good thing for creatives. Because what I said is, fuck it, I'll just do my own thing. I'd always felt like an outsider, even before I left Canada in 1989, and I'd been fascinated with the idea of belonging for decades. So then rather than be a writer in residence, I decided to come up with the idea of writer out of residence. I decided to research belonging to see if I could unlock its secrets and force it to happen to me. At home, sweating in my underwear in the subtropical summer, I typed up writer out of residence, printed it out, and slapped it on the top of my laptop. And you know what happened? When I went to cafes and I wrote, people asked me about the sign. They came up and they talked to me. So I added pop-up story catcher to my persona. I started a volunteer writing program for migrant and refugee children. I collected stories of belonging at cafes and libraries, at festivals and at a hospital, on the plane and at readings. I now have about 130 stories of belonging. And story number 131 is my own. Looking back, I was completely open and completely unprepared. When I talked to people, or when people talked to me about belonging, they shared their most intimate traumas. They told me stories of racism, poverty, prison, rape, chronic pain, eating disorders, homelessness, addiction, and incest. They spoke, I listened. I love this quote from author Ben Okri. He says, listening is quite close to suffering. When we really listen, it becomes an act of empathy, and we become connected to something deeper. And listening in this way to all these courageous people broke me open. I realized one afternoon, sitting on my balcony, overlooking the jacaranda and the lily-pilly trees, and listening to the cockatoos, that everything I'd been chasing to understand belonging was linked to the death of my little brother. In 1987, when trauma and suicide were whitewashed with shame, my brother killed himself. He was 16, I was 20. The thing that keeps coming back to me, among many other things, of course, is that he must have felt completely and utterly alone. The year after my brother died, I hit a crisis point, and to get through it, I made 3 rules. I would always tell people I loved them. I would never take anyone for granted. I would never have any regrets. I've followed these 3 rules as best as I could for the last 3 decades. I tried to make other people happy, to make them feel heard, to make them feel seen and respected. There was only one person I did not apply those 3 rules to: myself. My head was filled with condemning statements. At the same time, I tried to erase the feeling that I wasn't enough. I was treating everyone, even strangers, better than I treated myself on the inside. What does it mean when we take ourselves for granted? When we never tell ourselves we are loved, that we love ourselves, that we deserve love? For me, and this is what I just figured out in the last year, so it's taken me 3 decades, it meant I was contributing to my own erasure. And this, I believe, is a very spiritual matter. I'm not blaming my brother's suicide for my flaws or my faults, but these have been huge aha moments for me. All this time, I thought belonging was about place, or I thought I could force it to happen to myself by doing things, or that it was something I could magically find by listening to other people's stories. And maybe I did, because I've learned that belonging is about building connections to other people, to the past, to the land, and most importantly, to ourselves. It's about putting ourselves out there and reclaiming our voices. And writing allows us the time and the space to do this. We don't find belonging, we actively build it. One word, one experience at a time. I just finished this little story, my life story, with something I heard Tracy Chevalier say. She was on a podcast by the Tate Modern, and it's from a series all about the art of. And Tracy Chevalier is the author of The Girl with the Pearl Earring. And she said she belongs to the person she has become. I'd like to amend it a tiny bit and say, I'm learning to belong to the person I'm becoming. Those are my thoughts about my experience.
Kirsten, that's beautiful. That's exquisite. That's really exquisite. Thank you for that. Wow. Okay. So, and is this the first that you've brought all that together in a public space, all those pieces to narrate? Is that the first you've put that together?
Yes, it is the first time in a public space. It's actually the first time I've ever talked to people about the 3 rules I made for myself. I was 20.
Okay.
They were rules that I made in my head to get myself through life. I decided after my brother died that I was an atheist and I needed to create meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So and I feel that I no longer want to be part of the world that doesn't want to talk about things. I want to be part of the world that is talking about these things, that is making them, that we're giving voice to them.
Exactly. And you're committed to, and writing for you is a path where you have space and structure and time to reflect, right? To return to memory, find meaning, reflect, and bring your voice out publicly. So writing for you is really key in all of this, in the meaning making.
Writing is the key because,
Okay.
for example, we started talking over a year ago, and I knew I wanted to write. I knew I wanted to talk about this, but I wasn't quite sure how I would make the leap and how I would encourage everyone else to make the leap.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a lot of time thinking about these things. And I spent a lot of time thinking about these things when I was doing the rough draft of my manuscript in the MFA.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't always time to think, but having deadlines means that we can give ourselves the time to think and to ponder and really to question. And it's not like I have the answers. I don't have any answers, but I think I'm getting closer to coming to some sort of understanding so that I can grow even more in the future.
Okay, that's beautiful. And you know, you realize what you've done with creating it this way, right? You've created us, you've cast us as the story catchers. right? All of us on this webinar have become the story catchers. That mirrors back what what you have done. You are number 131 in your own story list. But how interesting that we're actually in a situation now where we're catching the story, and you're inviting us to have that, sit in a place of empathy and listen. It's just beautiful. It's very, very, very gratifying.
I like the I like the way that's become circular. That now you're my story catchers.
Yeah, exactly.
And as my story catchers, you can go forward into the world and become other people's story catchers, and someone will become your story catcher. I think one of the things I'd like to add is that it was only when I was graduating from my MFA, and the whole MFA was online, so it was a COVID MFA, and none of us got to meet in person until we showed up. Like some of us showed up for the graduation, not everyone could make it. And I posted something online, and I'd said that something about my brother and my Nana and wishing that they were there. And they are always with me for every life event. My brother is always with me. Sometimes I feel like I think about him more than I think about the people who are alive, and wonder. And I'd always thought that my brother's death had somehow dragged me down or diminished me. And I'd always felt I needed to live for two, that I was carrying my brother with me. And at my graduation, there was something my cousin said to me that made me understand that I was wrong, that it was my brother who was carrying me. And so I go forward knowing that I'm not alone, and that he carries me and supports me, as do all my story catchers.
That's beautiful. Deep gratitude. Wow. I mean, may we all live so long, right, to come to these realizations and these insights. It's really astonishing. I think too, I mean, we'll turn in a moment to the writing exercise, because it's so close in tone to how you've just spoken. I don't want to disrupt this, because I think we should move to that really quickly. But what you've done, being able to pull these threads out of 3 decades worth of knowing and unknowing, right? And you're moving into a place of knowing by allowing other people's stories in at a really deep level. Like, it's a very, very interesting. I relate really closely to what you're saying. I understand that kind of movement, and then the ability to share it as you have tonight. And I'm hoping that's the kind of work that when we hear what you're saying, that's what your book will sound like. Am I right? I haven't seen any of it. Is that right?
That's what part of my book will sound like.
Okay.
Part of it's supposed to be quite funny, because it's the story of renovation. But I can tell you more about it after, if you'd like.
That's good. Yeah, we'll get to the fun part too, right? Because we do deep and meaningful, but we also do lots of fun. So it's the whole. We span the whole. Whatever it takes to be human. All good. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and pull up the PowerPoint, and let's go into that. And then you can bring people into, move this over. So there we go. That's a bit better. Oops. Let's go back to the beginning. Here we go. So I'll narrate the first couple of slides just to orient everyone, and then I'll turn it, Kirsten, over to you.
And will you be timing the exercises?
Yeah, I'll do the timing. I'll do the timing.
Okay.
So here we are. Lost objects from erasure to belonging. This is my special guest, Kirsten Fogg. If you're watching this after we have the webinar, you'll know that we are sponsored by Awakening Spirituality, an online community of seekers. And this is Kirsten's contact information, her website, Instagram, Twitter, and her email. And this is where you can also find me as well, just so you have. And we encourage you really to reach out at any time and continue the conversation of whatever is sparked for you tonight. Just by all means, keep talking. Okay, Kirsten, over to you.
So I thought of this writing exercise, lost objects, because I have a few lost objects that I have thought about considerably over the last several decades. While I talk, if you just have a paper and a pencil, or a pen and a pencil, just draw circles or doodles, just to free up your hand, and listen to the sound of the paper or the pencil on the paper rather than the sound just of my own voice. And try not to think too much. We're dealing with memories. We don't know what will come up or where they'll take you. So be gentle with yourself and take the time you need. Here we need to think of an object that has disappeared from your life, one you remember well and can picture. When you start writing, you can start with a long time ago, I used to have. Was this object stolen, broken, lost, or given away? It could be a recipe or a pressed flower, a train ticket or one shoe, your grandmother's brooch or a lock of hair. What did it feel like? Could you fit it in your hand or wrap your arms around it? Was it weighty or light? As I talk, I encourage you to just start writing. And then when I stop, you just keep writing, and I will write with you. Did this object have a smell? Can you breathe it in now? Did it smell like snowflakes or time passing? Did it make a sound or have a color? Was this color warm or cold? Was it the color of sunshine? Was the sound like the ancient beat of the land or the brash tambourine of the city? Are there sensations rising in your body? Can you pinpoint them? Name them? Accept them? How does your throat feel? Your shoulders? Your fingers? What happened in your body when you realized it was gone?
And Kirsten, I'll give people about another 4 minutes. Is that okay? one more minute. Okay, are you ready to move to part 2? Kirsten, you have to narrate, unmute.
Again.
Okay. Oops, it muted again for some reason. Oh, keeps reverting.
Hopefully
Okay.
that works.
Okay.
So part 2 has 2 smaller sections. You can either do 1 or 2 or do them as you'd like. What I'd like you to do now is step outside yourself and write about your younger self and this object using the third person point of view. So you would use they, she, or he, not I. For example, if it was me, I would write, she opened the drawer and lifted the papers. The keys were there, but not the keychain. She, and I would continue. Describe what this younger self saw and did when they were looking for the object with that mounting sense of urgency. Now you can go anywhere your body takes you or your memories takes you. You can go to the flurry of physical actions. You can go to verbs. You can go to feelings, emotions, and just write on that for a minute or 2.
Hmm.
That's about 2 minutes. Staying in the third person, just keep going and imagine a new life for the object. Be as fanciful as you'd like. Maybe an artist found it on the cobblestones and picked it up and took it to their studio. Maybe it ended up in a flea market at the Porte de Clignancourt, and it's now in someone else's home. Maybe it's sitting on a desk or a windowsill.
Ready? Part 3.
Just looking to see is everyone ready for part 3? I feel like I'm interrupting.
It's okay.
So in part 1, we use the object to recover memories and emotions. In part 2, we created the narrative space to explore and possibly reframe these memories. It's a way to look at the scene differently, to take yourself outside of your body, to give you some distance, to look at the setting from a different point of view, or to try to anyways, the setting, the actions, the emotions, the physicality in your own body. Part 3 is an invitation in your own time to think about how this object may represent something unfulfilled in you. How is it linked to your belief about yourself as a creative, or a writer, or a spiritual person? And what if, like the object, we retell our story by talking to ourselves the way we talk about the people, the places, and the things that we love? So hopefully you'll be able to do part 3 on your own some other time. maybe later on this week or this Saturday morning or Sunday morning, over a cup, and maybe it will allow you to go in a different direction or explore a new piece of fiction or poetry or just open up something that you hadn't thought about before.
It's beautiful. It's an incredibly rich, layered exercise, very intimate, incredibly intimate, beautifully imaginative, evocative, invitational. This is one of my favorite exercises that we've done. And of course, we want to give people a chance to connect with you and talk with you about that. So let's, you and I, do just talk briefly about the resources that you have given. So the next 3 slides are resources, and that we'll talk about those briefly. So we have to kind of break the spell. Are you ready to break the spell? I'm so sorry to break the spell, but that's what we'll do, just so you can share all these resources that you've brought to the fore. And so briefly, Kirsten, you sent me a list of really rich things, obviously works that you love. And these are books on writing and art and books on belonging. Do you just want to speak briefly to why you chose these, or how these connect, maybe how they inspired what you've talked about?
I can speak briefly about some of them. I mean, I think Birds Art Life was one of the first books I read when I moved back to Canada. So
Okay.
my computer's beeping. And it really spoke to me because she explores the whole life of a writer in 1 year. It's a beautifully written book that you can pick up and read time and time again and find something else gorgeous. Make your art, no matter what, is really creative, affirming. Just do it. It doesn't matter what's going on around you. The Art of Slow Writing by Louise DeSalvo. I love this book so much. I went to write her a thank you note and found out that she had died, and I was really sad. And I only found out about it a couple of years ago when it was recommended by someone in the MFA program. And what I loved about it was that she talks about, and she did research about everything that people had gone through to write. So it's not about actually writing slowly, it's about the work that goes in to make long form. I love Michael Salesi's Craft in the Real World. It is something that I think every writer should read because it gives a perspective outside of the Western world perspective. This whole idea of 3 acts, that's all Western world. I love that book, and I go back to it and reference it. Charlotte Wood is an Australian writer who wrote The Luminous Solution, also about creativity, I think before the pandemic or at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm not quite sure exactly when. Someone might correct me. On belonging, I mean, there are lots of books that sort of cover that, but I love anything by Pico Iyer. And The Art of Stillness is one of my favorites. Also, Andre Eckermann, his Alibis Essays on Elsewhere and Letters of Transit, they both speak really to my experience of living in 4 different countries and belonging everywhere and nowhere. Ross, it's funny that all these books on belonging, the three authors are all men, because I tend not to read a lot of men. The Book of Delights by Ross Gay, I just find it's a really nice book to pick up. It's quite short. And I thought that a lot of it was about belonging.
Okay, so here we have memoir and narrative nonfiction and fiction. Want to speak briefly to these?
Yeah, so I met Kamal El Soleli a few months after I moved to Canada, and I love him. His book Intolerable is amazing. It's a very short piece about his history and like his history and when he came to Canada and what his family has been through. And then he's recently come out with a book about return, people going back to their original countries. He's a very generous man who I just think is a brilliant writer. Tanya Talaga, I love Seven Fallen Feathers. I think if there were more belonging in the world, we wouldn't have that book. But it is a book that I believe, and I read it again shortly after I moved to Canada because I really wanted to understand and start to learn about Indigenous history.
Mhm.
In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado is, again, brilliantly written. It's short chapters, and um, about empowerment and rights, and telling a story that hasn't been told because of the way society perceives lesbian couples. The Asparagus Wars is something I read recently by Carol Major. She was born in Scotland, is a Canadian-Australian who's currently living in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. It is a beautiful memoir weaving together the story of her, the story of the death of her daughter, and the story of First World War soldiers who, oh gosh, what's the word when they don't want, when they try to escape? Oh dear, when they run away.
Run away. Yeah.
Um, deserters, that's the word. Oh, man, menopause. First World War deserters. And I was a bit worried about, this book was recommended to me by a friend in Australia, and I was a bit worried about reading it because it mentioned the death of her daughter, and I'm always very sensitive to that, but it was done in such a way that it was beautiful, and I loved it. I didn't feel I was traumatized with her. And then, just in case I've been too heavy, I've got some fun fiction for you. Ayesha at Last by Uzma Jalaluddin, who is a Toronto-based writer, and it's a great story. Book Lovers by Emily Henry, I love that book. Dial A for Aunties is very funny and a different take on a murder mystery.
Okay.
And then another one, The Witches of Moonshine Manor, which just came out, by Bianca Murray. And Bianca Murray is the person and the host of The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, which is an amazing podcast about
It is,
writing.
which takes us to
Which takes us to a podcast, How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. Everyone needs to know how to fail. And she interviews someone different every time. And the idea is that, in order to live better, we have to fail. And then I've mentioned The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. And then I don't know if anyone here is French or speaks French, but I love the La Masque et la Plume. It's about, I listen mainly to the literature ones where they talk about books and what they liked and what they didn't like. For websites, I really like Immigrant Strong. Every couple of weeks, or is it once a month, she curates a list of essays, articles, anything written by immigrants about immigrants. And it's really fascinating and speaks to my heart a lot. Shalene Knight, if you ever have a chance to take a course with her, and sometimes she offers free courses, I highly recommend it. She recently started Breathing Space Creative Literary Studio. I know some of the things you have to pay for and sign up for, but she's all about writing in a way that supports ourselves and creating writing habits that are helpful to ourselves. And I just think she is generous and kind and brilliant.
she's one of our, yeah, and she's a star. She is amazing. Shalene is incredible. Okay, so I'm going to hit stop share. That was phenomenally rich, absolutely beautiful. We're going to stop recording in a moment, and in about 4 or 5 minutes time, it'll be on the hour, and people who need to leave will leave, and the rest of us will stay and linger. for a little while and have a chance to talk with one another and talk with Kirsten. So Vicki, I'm going to ask you to stop recording, and this will be available on the web